he hates LA and how there was someone who died on the MTR, the train, and no one noticed for like several hours. He was upset by that, how meaningless that was, which is funny considering his life being like how he thinks everything is meaningless. And then at the very end of the movie, that.
Hello, universe, and welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot. As always, I am your host, Maverick, and today we are joined by our co-host, once again, Avalon, discussing the 2004 release of the movie Collateral, which was written and directed by the Stuart Beattie as the writer and directed by Michael Mann, to bring you this quite the interesting neo-noir action thriller film. So, just getting it started off as we always do, Avalon, what are some of your favorite things about this film? Maybe some of the biggest drawbacks about this film? Overall, what is your impression of this thing before we get into the real nitty-gritty?
I'm gonna be honest. One of my favorite parts of this movie is the portrayal of Vincent in this movie. Just because it's not what you first. It's an assassin, but it's like a more realistic take on an assassin, but also like human take too. Mm-hmm. So it's just like it's a fully complicated, like complex character in his own right, and I just love that character in this movie. I also love the tension throughout this movie, just the constant pushing forward, like how the conflict escalates as it moves forward through the movie, and how one thing leads to another. And also, I just love the conflict of ideals and themes in this movie, which we'll get into in a bit, but I actually really like how they played things out. As far as drawbacks, I mean, I can't really think of much as far as drawbacks for this particular one. Again, I mean, the only thing I could maybe think of is perhaps the only plot point that maybe seems a little questionable is the FBI at the last part of the movie, like what they're doing. So, but that's kind of not explained. They just kind of disappear after a point in the movie, and that's the only drawback I can think of. But
yeah,
but we'll get into that.
That makes sense. That is an interesting, especially because they were so close on catching him. I didn't even think of that. I had other questions in my mind for sure about how it ended, but we'll get to that for sure. I think one of the things that you really said, which struck a chord with me, was just how we have a villain in this story which is very intent on killing people, right? A John Wick type, super villain type, ultra powerful man versus man fighter. And at the same time, this guy is incredibly philosophical in some ways for being a villain. And he's constantly asking questions about really the frailty of life and what you should be doing with the time you have here. And posing those questions to our protagonist, I thought added a very interesting dynamic to an otherwise pretty straightforward villain. So it was very well crafted for sure. And we'll get into it. But for those of you who are unfamiliar with Collateral, Avalon, what is the movie Collateral about?
So Collateral is about a character named Max DeRocher, a LA cab driver who's essentially got ideas and dreams. He's just working to hopefully get somewhere in life. And he just delivers people to where they need to go. And that's his job. One night he picks up a guy and he offers to pay him extra if he takes him to 5 other stops throughout the night just to be his cab driver for the evening, and he agrees to it, only to discover after the first stop that he's essentially being a chauffeur for a hitman, and he can't get out of it now, and so he's like stuck driving this guy around for the rest of the night, trying to figure out a way to escape him. So that is essentially the plot.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, and it really is an interesting dynamic where I thought, especially watching it initially, oh, well, how are you going to force someone to stay with you and drive you everywhere as a hitman for 5 stops and make it believable? But they do very well on that point, especially to not only make it believable, but make it consistently get worse as the story progresses. So I was
Yeah.
very impressed with that aspect, and that really, like, just that whole situation speaks of tension, right? Oh my gosh, this is crazy. Someone's being
Yeah.
forced against their will to aid in doing evil in the world. So love the premise is just great. Some would say, oh, it's very similar to John Wick in regards to just a man going around killing people and whatnot,
Well,
maybe
okay,
because it's a slashing violent film. I would argue
there's
it's
a
not.
difference. It's not. No, because here's the deal. It's the villain who is the John Wick character. It's Tom Cruise's Vincent character, which, by the way, this might be one of my favorite roles I've seen Tom Cruise in. Just want to say that right now. Like, I mean, he's known for playing the good guy, like super spy, you know, like Mission Impossible, you know. But in this case, he's the villain, and I think he does an excellent job playing a great villain in this movie. Like, but that's beside the point.
Yeah, for sure.
But like, he's going around and he's certainly justifying his actions, but even we as the audience can say, like, what he's doing is wrong. He's killing people. It doesn't justify Vincent's actions, not really.
Yeah. So what was your rating when you gave this based off the 9 points that we used to rate the movies in this podcast?
I got an 8.05.
Wow, okay. That's pretty high. That's
Yep.
That's a close, not perfect, but that's pretty.
No, it's
pretty
not perfect,
close.
but it is really high. So I really liked this movie. So
yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I did not give it an 8 or higher, but I did give it a 7.4. Okay. So that is still pretty high, you know, pretty strong in regards to the rating. And we'll get into why exactly, because it was really, really good. It's a really, really good film. And then there is one area that I think is critical that they messed up on. So we'll get to that, but it doesn't kill the movie, right? It doesn't kill the movie. It's more just it really pulled me out. So we'll get to that though, for sure. So we have this character of Max, and they started off with him picking up this girl at the airport, I believe it was, and bringing her out to the city to drop her off at her law firm to get some work done. What was your impression of this character, Max, and how they introduced him and bring him into the film and start his arc?
Well, they kind of show him like his work day, where it's like he's delivering people, like driving them around, and we'll give it a glimpse of what goes on in his work day. Like, he's a cab driver. His basic stuff. Some of the crap that goes on his day with like unhappy customers and such. And then you get this girl who's clearly like, he kind of likes her a little bit, and so they start talking. He makes a bet with her, and like they have this kind of fun conversation on the way to her location, and it's memorable enough for her that she leaves her number with him. She's like, I actually like talking with you, let's talk again sometime. And that makes his night. And of course, right after that, like, and it's like the whole scene is good for establishing Max's character, like showing us who he is, what he does, what he wants to do. It kind of fleshes out his character pretty well in the first minutes of the movie. So,
well, and you get even the big discrepancy that they paint in the audience's mind of Max is released right at the front, right? Where he goes, oh, I have this dream to have this almost executive experience limo company, right? And bringing people around and giving them the time of their life so they don't even want to leave the limo. And then she's like, oh, okay, how close are you to that? How long have you been being a taxi driver, right? This temporary job. Oh, you've been one for 12 years, right? And so there's this huge disparity between who he wants to be, his big dreams and goals and aspirations, and then the reality of where he has been kind of stuck in this rut for a consistent period of time, not doing what he needs to do to really make progress in his life on this goal. So, and I think that that's really key to who his character is, because, well, I think anyways, that it bleeds into everything else into the story in how he as a character interacts.
Yeah. Well, we want to talk about his character and his story arc in this movie. Like, his character is, like, his character change in this movie is important. Like, it shows him developing, changing as a character. He's kind of this, almost like afraid. Like, he has to be perfect in his mind. It's like, oh, I don't want to step out and take a risk that backfires on me. Well, he's almost like playing things safe, but too safe, to the point where it's like he's not actually doing anything in his life. Though he can't see that, he just like playing it safe, though other people can see that if they like, and some people even do later on in the movie. But like,
Right.
it's not until later on in the movie when he realizes I can't be playing it safe. I have to take risks and put myself out there, and that of course leads into the conflict of this movie. But yeah,
Yeah. Well, it's just like you have this. You have to have a baseline, right? And
yeah,
as we've talked about in other podcasts and other films, we've talked about how providing this baseline of who the character is at the start is huge to developing the character and empathizing with where the character's at and all of that stuff, right? If you watched our review of Spirited Away, which just came out last week, you're going to see that, you know, that's a big discussion on there, is how she starts as a character is key to the story arc because she changes so much in that story. Same thing here, right? You have the baseline established of who he is, excuse me, and where he needs to go, and that makes a critical difference. So I think you're absolutely right because, yeah. Sorry, you want to keep going on his arc because it really progresses once he hits the main point of conflict, which is his. Well, well, I'll save my thoughts on the villain, but like the villain propels the story forward, right? You have this character Vincent, and he enters his cab and at first entices, but then cajoles Max into bringing him around everywhere in the city to help him get his job done. That's what forces Max to be in the middle of the conflict that we're viewing. What were your thoughts on him as a character once he has this internal or external conflict forcing him?
I mean, I think it's a considering his character where he's like always playing it safe. It makes perfect sense. Where it's like doesn't want to die. He doesn't want to like get hurt. It's just like, so with this threat hanging over him, he's like, I don't like. He tries to convince Vincent to let him go, but of course Vincent doesn't. So he just kind of goes along with it. He's like, I don't hurt me. Just like let's. But at the same time, he's like trying to figure out how do I get away from this guy, and it's like
Right.
It's this back and forth thing.
Right. Well, and this is so. As a side note, and maybe you can speak more to this because I do a bit of writing on the side. Obviously, this podcast is by storytellers for storytellers, so we can tell better stories ourselves, right? Part of that is because I want to encourage myself to write better stories, and I was writing a short story about a character who was rather apathetic toward making progress on his life. And this guy isn't quite that, but he's kind of similar. And one of the struggles I found with that type of character, which makes me critical of them, is that having a character that's not making progress on their life or trying is more apathetic than anything else. It's hard to get them compelled into the story. And so what makes this story so good, and maybe this is an instrument that can be used in lots of stories, is that he has an immediate death threat, right? He's something that everyone wants to avoid, everyone has to avoid, or like really, if you're in the story and trying to do anything, you're going to try to survive. And so, basic physiological need propels even the weakest of individuals into the story, and that's what they did. So I think, especially in regards to having a discussion about taking the reins of your life and trying to make progress on whatever is set before you and having that discussion, right? This, you have to have some sort of existential death threat looming over you to have that discussion and have it as gripping as you have in this story, right?
Well,
I think that it compels it very well.
Yeah. No, another thing to note about Max's character, though, and maybe this is another thing about apathetic characters to think about. Max thinks he's making changes to his life. It's not like he doesn't. It's not that he's not making changes. He thinks he is, because it's like he's saving money from his job supposedly for this other business stuff, but he's not taking the risk. He's like thinking about it. Really, he's like, and he's spending too much time. And as he said, 12 years doing cab driving work. Like that's not doing anything with it. Not really. He's not really figuring things out. He thinks he is, but he's not. He's convinced himself things are moving forward, but they're like really, it's not.
No, and that's key, and that's what you have pointed out by Annie, who he picks up at the beginning of the story. You have that with Vincent when he gets into the car. Even before he knows that he's a bad guy, they're having discussions about, oh, what do you do? What do you want to do? Blah, blah, blah. And there's a certain sense in which, from the beginning of their conversation, this hitman, Vincent, is speaking into Max's life about what you ought to be doing with your life, which is one of the interesting dichotomies of the story, is that you have, right, this not apathetic character, but very slow moving character, maybe a bit apathetic in some regards, but mostly just not making progress in any way on a dream that he supposedly says he has and really cares about. And there's a certain sense in which the villain of this story is the one that smacks him over the side of the head multiple times and goes, "What are you doing? Why don't you make progress in your life? Why don't you take action?" So it's a very weird dichotomy that they provide in the story through this discussion with the villain and the cab driver. And they do that. It's just so well interspersed that it really progresses the story and progresses the characters.
No, it does. I do love how Vincent throughout this movie, where it's like, even though he is the villain, like clearly opposed, he keeps like buddying up to Max in a way. It's almost like he's trying to be friends with him, and it's like just these conversations, everything that happens, they have these like he kind of forces. He's like almost acting like he steps into ways he doesn't have to. Like when his boss calls him over the intercom because he found out with a traffic like accident, the police pulled him over. And he's like threatening Max over the radio. So then Vincent takes the radio and starts threatening the guy over the radio and like telling Max what to say. And it's like, he didn't have to do that, but clearly he's like...
Right.
So it's just kind of funny to see this like, these little moments where he's like warming up to him for some reason.
Right. And it's so interesting. Like you have that once Vincent, because obviously once the first hit happens and then the target falls on Max's cab and messes up the windshield and all that, he's instantly involved in the action. And from there on out, you have simply it's not really a cat and mouse, it's a hostage really trying to find a way to get out, and multiple situations he can't, right? And multiple times Vincent saves him, ironically enough, or helps him out. Like you see with the two people who end up not helping him escape and end up actually robbing him, right? When he's zip tied to the
steering wheel.
Exactly, the steering wheel. He's thrust into the plot, and then he's instantly involved in the conflict as well, because Vincent is adding different things to make sure he doesn't escape. He's making sure that there's some incentive, and he even adds that as time goes on, where he's almost like doing the right thing, but at the same time it adds tension, quote unquote. Like I think the perfect example of this is when you get the second call from the taxi cab company's owner to Max, and he says, "Your mom's been calling me nonstop. What's going on? Can you just go visit her?" And that's when Vincent realizes, oh, you visit your mother every night, and you broke your routine. This is a red flag for someone who's trying to,
to lay low.
Yeah, to be under the radar during this job.
He goes visit his mom.
Yeah, he goes and he visits his mom, and Vincent is getting him to do the right thing, right? He has that discussion in the cab, in the middle of the cab, saying, "Hey, this is the right thing to do, where you should visit your mom. You don't know when you're going to die." And these questions about existential likelihood of survival in different situations and, stuff like that. It's like, okay, most people aren't thinking about whether or not they live when they visit their mom every night. But sure, that is definitely the right thing to do. And so he's not wrong, but he's the bad guy having this discussion. And they go to the hospital. He buys Max's mother flowers, even though he's never met her before. They give them to her. All of these things. And so it's like, wow, he's being the quote-unquote conscience of Max, getting him to do the right thing. At the same time, it's like, this is the hitman. And now he has extra leverage, which he ends up using later in the film, where he goes, I know where your mother is, and I could take her out too if you don't do what I tell you to. So it's just brilliant in regards to the situation, right? Adding tension while also being totally understandable given the scenario and all of these other things. It's in regards to weaving a story well, that it's both cohesive, it follows naturally, and it adds to the tension. They just build on a solid structure in the story, and I'm very impressed. Love it. Everyone who writes stories should take note of the way that they did this so that they can do it themselves, because should be repeated 100%.
Yes.
Not this exact story, but like
Yeah.
the way they did that.
Yes.
Anyways, what did you think in regards to the I want to keep going with Max's story, but I almost feel like it would be too much to not either talk about Vincent now, because we've already discussed him so much kind of in the periphery,
let's talk about Vincent
or
now.
talk about Ray. Either way.
Oh, Ray.
Either way. Because I think that it's important to note that at the same time that this discussion and interactions are happening between the Hitman and Max, you have a side following path, a side story exactly, of this character Ray, who's an undercover cop, as well as the FBI getting involved, trying to track down these murders that are suddenly occurring in the middle of the night, right? And they're closing in on this hitman. So,
well, and the side story provides context for the audience, where it's like, because we don't know when Vincent starts this killing spree, like, who are these people that he's killing? What is this connected to? It's this side plot. Like, even the detective, Ray, doesn't completely know what these, like, because he's guarding this one guy. The guy doesn't show up for his, like, meeting or whatever. He goes to the guy's apartment, finds the window busted, clearly a struggle, and below this broken glass, blood. And when the police arrive, like, they investigate the scene, and it's like, clearly there's a missing person now. And we already know it's the first dead body. But, and then from there, we start to realize who these people are. Like, they're all connected, and they're all part of this prosecution that's going on, and someone is trying to get rid of everyone connected to this case. So.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It helps build the context, but
then he comes across a different dead body, which is connected to the other person. And then he's like, wait. And then he begins to look into this, and then they begin to realize the FBI is already involved. They go to the FBI, and when they find out about the third death, then they begin to put the dots together, realize someone is killing off the witnesses to this trial. And these are all people we're trying to protect. And so it more or less, like, at the same time, the FBI is like, when they find out about Max, they think they need to kill Max or stop Max because they think he's Vincent, though he's not. They just haven't. But Fanning is the first person, like, the only person in this whole situation on the police side who's like, wait, it doesn't make any sense that he's the killer because of, like, he's been a cab driver for 12 years. And it doesn't make any sense for him to just, like, jump up and start killing people for no good reason. And so then, like, he's, like, trying to figure out what's actually going on while the FBI is, like, trying to apprehend Max and stop the killings.
Right. And honestly, I was at first I was confused by Ray's character. And even after the film, for half a second, I was like, I'm not sure why he was there. But I think there was both a thematic reason he was there and also a storytelling reason he was there. I think the storytelling one is obvious, more obvious, which is what you said. And that is that it provides context for the rest of the story to provide motive for Vincent and provide a actual, almost like a chase that's going on, right? So there's almost at the same time that Vincent is trying to track down these people, there's more or less a chase crunch, not exactly a time crunch, although there is some level of that through the interaction.
It raises the stakes. It, like, more or less, we're shown another side at nose of Max, and we realize, something like Max may die because of the FBI's involvement, and we know, like, it adds tension to the movie because, like, oh shoot, like, what's going to happen? Is he going to survive? Are they going to figure out who Vincent is, and are they going to actually stop Vincent and not kill Max? It's like. And then, of course, the mob gets involved, like, with their side of it, and it creates the whole showdown at the fourth killing, which...
Right. Yeah, every single party ends up in some way being targeted against Max in this entire situation. The FBI, the mob, Vincent, everyone's targeted on this cab driver, even though the cab driver is actually... I guess he's complicit because he has driven around the hitman, but, like, he hasn't actually created any of the killings himself, and he really doesn't want to be involved. He's being forced to be involved.
Yeah. And actually, you could say, like, well, just on that note, and this is kind of touching on themes, like, I mean, this movie does have a lot of themes and, like, ideas going around. You could arguably say that Max and Vincent represent life and death in a way. Because if you notice, every time there's a death or someone's life is on the line, Max tries to say, like, argue for their life. It doesn't matter who it is. It's like he tries to convince Vincent not to kill someone every time. Like, he tries to, like, he doesn't get in the way, but it's like he's arguing for life, more or less. Like, he doesn't want to see anyone die. Whereas Vincent's like caviar, like careless, like, oh, whatever, it's just another death kind of thing. Like, it's his job.
Yeah, that's true. And, well, I do want to terminate on Vincent for sure. But before we get off of Ray for a second, two things I want to say about Ray. One, loved his death. Absolutely loved it. And this is like, okay, if you watched me watching it, you would have seen it, because I didn't see his death coming, frankly. And that was what I loved, is that I think that he was, and this is maybe why, is because you saw him as a character, maybe more symbolically, being built up as the opposition to Vincent. And so it followed more or less a stereotypical undercover cop or cop versus bad guy or hitman or robber or whatever situation, where one is trying to find the other. The undercover cop is, the grunt man who no one believes in, and he's going to figure it out and make it, And so he's following all these stereotypes, and you go, okay, he's going to catch Vincent eventually. And that's almost the hope of Max, is you don't see Max as the person to fight against Vincent. He's more or less the tool that's being forced to be used by Vincent to help him in his plan. But he really doesn't want to be there, and he's waiting and hoping in some way for an opportunity to show up. And so when Ray shows up at the club, right, as the Korean mob boss is getting executed by Vincent, Ray comes up, finds Max in the middle of the club and says, hey, I got you. Let's get out of here. I believe that you're innocent. More or less, he's like adding trust as quickly as he can, saying, hey, we're going to help you get out of this together, blah, blah, blah. And as he walks out of the club, bang, bang, he's dead. And it's not some dramatic slow-mo death that you see in all the movies. You're like, oh, no. As a side note, I almost feel like if you see a slow-motion death at this point, there's a 50% chance that they're going to come back to life because of how much that happens. And just like how much value is attributed to a character. And now, I don't know, production companies are like, we can't kill off characters. We have to bring them back to life because they're too important, whatever. Yeah. Didn't do that at all. Kim simply took this super important character that was the crux to this side plot going right alongside the A plot, right? This B plot is being driven by this character, Ray, and bang, the entire side plot just disappears because they kill the main character of the side plot. Yeah. So it wasn't like extra frills. It was just, he's dead, we're moving on. And it did two things. One, I didn't expect it. I was like, wow, that's incredible. That was crazy. Didn't see that coming. Second thing was that it made an important point in the plot. And it was that no one is coming for Max. Yeah. No one's here to save him. No one's going to stop Vincent unless Max makes a move. Yeah. And that's what he has to do. He has to take responsibility and take action in this situation.
Yeah. No, actually, in a way, the side plot is like almost like giving a tinge of almost like offering like maybe of hope, like the audience, like, oh, maybe this like a handout was like, hey, like maybe the guy will come and save him. Like maybe this guy's the hero who will save Max out of the situation. And it's like, it's kind of built up that way, where it's like he's seeing through everything. He's kind of seeing that believing that Max isn't the killer. And it seems like he's going to save him. And so like when we see him leaving the club, it's almost like, hey, maybe Max is being saved now. Maybe he's getting out of this. And then he dies. And it's almost like this dark moment in a certain way where it's like, nope, he just lost his like major hope. And now that he's still under Vincent. And Vincent still has him in custody, like still has him as a hostage. And
Yeah. Yeah, like it's proving that theme that we were talking about.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, we've talked about Fanning. We've talked about Max. Let's talk about Vincent.
Yeah. So what was your impression of this villain? I mean, we've talked about it a bit for sure. I love some of the philosophical points, but maybe you want
Yeah.
to delve more into what he represents or who he is as a character, especially as he leads into the finale of the movie.
Well, so in a way, like, because there's so many themes and ideas played out. I mean, I said life and death, but that's not the only thing. Where it's almost
No.
like because you see clearly with Max, who's like, oh, he's like like trying to play things safe. Where he's like, oh, I'm like not like taking any risk whatsoever, but it's like I'm gonna do things right and build things up like the right way in his mind, though it's really just not making a move. And then you have Vincent, who's like technically taking all sorts of risks, but he's also like laying low and like doing his job right and like killing, like he's paid to kill people. And he's not flashy about it like John Wick. He's not like some super amazing assassin. In fact, every time he kills someone, it's quick and to the point. Whereas like, he doesn't mess around. In fact, the
Right.
only extended fight scene really is the scene in the club when the fourth death, where all these forces are at work and there's like this massive gunfight between like 3 or 4 different forces all over the place, and people are dying left and right.
Yeah,
But
that's
like that's
true.
the only major fight scene in the whole movie. Everything else is like cat and mouse chases all over the place, like all this conflict of tension all over the place. But like as like assassin, like he's like this realistic look on an assassin. Like if you were to see an assassin in real life, you'd expect him to stay undercover, lay low, like not make big waves, like not draw attention to himself.
Right.
Just like, and it fits his character. Like when he tells Max to go visit his mom, it makes sense for his character where he's like he's trying to lay low. If Max regularly goes to his mom every single night when she's in the hospital, visits her, and he doesn't do that for one night, that's going to raise questions. That's going to draw
Right.
attention to Max, and people are going to wonder. And he knows that. So he's like, you need to go visit your mom. Like, that's not okay with me. You have to go visit her so you're not drawing attention to yourself. And
Right.
so like it fits who he is and his job. And but as you said, he's philosophical. Um
Right.
but it's almost like he's philosophical because he's like lives such a morbid life where it's like he kills people and he almost doesn't want to attribute meaning to anything. He has this like nihilistic view of life where it's like everything doesn't matter. It's like Darwin, and like he mentions Darwin explicitly and like certain ideas where it's like we're nothing in this cosmic universe. Like what's a few deaths going to matter really in the long scheme of things? And it's just like take your risk now because your life is going to be over soon. Uh,
Yeah, that's an interesting point because it's not that he necessarily contradicts himself, right? Because
mhm.
he has that whole discussion, especially about, I believe it was blood diamonds in Rwanda and stuff like that, where you
Yeah.
have more people, like 10,000 people dying before you woke up this morning type
Mhm.
situation, right? And
Yeah.
then he
Well,
goes,
he's
and
using it
you're
as a justification for his actions, where he's like, "You're worried about
right,
this death? Like, so many people died in Rwanda. What about them? Huh? Like, why are
right,
you like, what makes their lives more important to you? What makes this life more important than them? Like, he's like making an argument why Max shouldn't care, but Max does care. Like, to him, there
right.
is meaning to things. He doesn't like that there's no meaning, and so it's like he like chafes visibly under the idea that nothing matters,
Right.
and
And
so
there's a certain sense in which I think that, and maybe this comes from a more moralistic framework of the universe, but he's almost condemning himself and at the same time reprimanding the audience or the characters in the story by saying, "Hey, we may not be seeing physical death tomorrow or today, but there is death around us, and there is people who are facing terrible consequences, and we act like that's not happening, and we don't care when we genuinely should care about things
mhm,
that are happening, even if they're not right in front of our faces." When
mhm,
most often that's all that we're caring about. And that's not the right response. It's not how we should react. We should look at the things that are beyond us and understand that, hey, there is value in that life, even if we don't see that person in front of us. And we need to take action to help stop that, however that looks like in our individual lives.
mhm.
And I think that plays out more clearly as the story progresses than necessarily in that conversation alone. But that does
Yeah.
provide a bedwork, really, because that's one of the first conversations they have as soon as Max realizes that Vincent is a hitman. and it's one of the first conversations they have that leads into the further killings and terminates in the final confrontation between Max and Vincent on the train.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that Max has a very interesting worldview, because you are right, especially as I think about it. He is this character who doesn't really bother about the future. He expects that the future might be bleak, but that doesn't mean that you don't do the kind thing now, which is why I said earlier there's a certain sense in which he's Max's conscience, because he's urging him to do right and moral things in his life, where he's like, you should visit your mom, you should care about the people around you, take the moment now to do the right thing rather than waiting for tomorrow, because tomorrow might not show up, right? Get your mom flowers, all of those kinds of things. And he doesn't really want to. In fact, he's really pissed off that he's getting this moralistic lesson from a hitman that he knows is going around killing people. And you see that when they're in the hospital room, and his mom is like, "Oh, isn't he such a nice man?" And you could just see Max blowing up inside, saying, "No, no, he's not a nice man. He's a bad man.
Yes,
don't encourage him."
The whole scene at hospital is hilarious just because of the conversation, everything that is said. It's like you can see the tension underneath. Like you can see Max visibly just like getting pissed about this whole situation, but he can't say anything. And Vincent's like showing all sorts of interest in his mom and asking questions and things about Max and his life, and just like making a situation worse than it needs to be for Max.
It's a brilliant scene. I'm so impressed by how they brought that about in the story arc. Loved it. Yeah. So what was your overall impression, especially of the end, where you have Max and Vincent facing off when Max finally realizes that he needs to take responsibility, right? He ends up going a bit on a rampage by driving recklessly through red lights and green lights, and then flipping the car and attempting to kill both of them. And then from there, well, I guess that scene is worth having discussion before we get to the train. So I don't know what your thoughts were on that, but it was an interesting dynamic for sure.
Well, I think like the whole movie, like we already kind of touched on Max's character change, but like as you said, it builds on itself. Where it's like Max, like he does these little things at first, where it's like he argues for people's lives, he argues for like these other things, but he's also being put gradually in worse situations where it's like he's taking action. Like even at the hospital, he takes advantage of the situation, grabs Vincent's briefcase and runs because he realizes that whatever's in there is important to Vincent. And then he gets to the bridge before Vincent can catch up with him and throws it over into the freeway where it gets run over by a semi. Vincent's angry, but it doesn't stop the whole chain of events. Vincent's like, all right, since you did this, now you're going to go into a meeting with the mob boss, pretending to be me, and you're going to get the rest of the information you just destroyed from him. And if you don't get that information, I am going to go kill your mom in the hospital on my way out of town. And so there's also a chance that this guy will kill you in there. So in the whole situation, Max has to man up. Like, he's a little scared at first, but then it's like he begins to realize he actually takes some courage, mans up, and like speaks like how he thinks Vincent would speak, and it's kind of believable. It's like, okay, and he convinces, he gets the information he needs, and he gets back to Vincent. And then like the whole scene at the club happens, and it's like, of course, like after the scene with the mob boss, and then almost getting saved by Fanning, and then he like is stuck with Vincent. He's like angry about the whole situation, and Vincent can tell he's angry. They start having this conversation. And then Vincent just starts pointing out, like, you're wasting your life. Like, you have this dream for 12 years. You aren't doing anything about it. It's just, like, he just lays everything out in front of Max. And Max begins to realize, like, it's almost like the switch clicks in that moment where he's like, you know what, you're right. I'm doing nothing. And he's just like, and he realizes he takes action. So then he starts this amazing scene where, like, he starts driving recklessly, speeding up, scaring Vincent. And he laughs off Vincent holding a gun to his head, and then he like crashes the cab intentionally. But of course they both survive. A policeman shows up, finds a dead body in the trunk, and is about to arrest Max when Max realizes who's the final victim. And it's the girl who he got the number from at the very beginning of the movie. And
Right.
so then begins the high speed like run and chase through the like city as Max tries to save her before Vincent can get to her, and then running from Vincent as Vincent like is trying to kill both Max and her.
Right. Right. And like, I thought that the interaction with the cop was believable enough, right? I wasn't fully convinced that he could just lay a cop down and take his gun and chain him to a car, but whatever. It happened decently enough that I was like, all right, that could plausibly happen, right? It looked like he was conceding to the cop, and on reality he was, until he saw the picture of Annie on the
screen.
computer showing
Yeah.
that she was the next victim of Vincent. So I'll take it, and I think that there's enough there that I'll give him the benefit of a doubt.
Yeah.
Definitely the moment of inflection though for him, and of course it's leave it to a woman to get a man motivated to take action in his life, but he's like at the very end he almost accepts the nihilism of Vincent in that moment. It goes, all right, well, if this life is meaningless and we need to take the action that is before us, and he's like, all right, I'm going to do my best, crash the car, try to kill you and me, and then that's the end of it, and accept whatever fate comes from that. And that's where he's about to get arrested, until he accepts responsibility for the other people's lives in his life, and he goes, okay, you're about to kill this girl that I got the phone number of, so he doesn't really know her that well, but he feels some compelling responsibility for her life because of the position he's in.
Well, he's the only person, I think in that moment, he knows he's the only person who knows that her life is on the line. But
Right.
she's going to get killed next, and he's the only person who could possibly do something about it.
Right,
So,
exactly. And so that's where he decides to take action, and he does, and he goes after her. He lets her know. They end up escaping just barely, and get on the train where they're still being chased by Vincent until they're in the two separate cabs, and they have their little showdown. What was your thought on that climactic final scene?
I mean, because it's like, it's hard for them to see each other for one thing, so I felt like it was believable enough where it's like you're shooting through like a door and windows where it's like they can't see each other very well, so it's not even like you can get a clear shot at someone. So it made sense that I was okay with that final scene. I did love like how it gradually it kept them on the train till that like Max is pretty much at the front of the train, like one of the last cars, and Vincent's the next one over. So it's literally like he's being forced into a gunfight with Vincent, and he knows it.
Yeah.
And they have this whole like shootout, and then Vincent gets shot like several times, and like kind of like he can't do anything more. It's like he drops the like he's gonna reload, but he drops the magazine or whatever.
Right.
He kind of slumps over, like sitting on the seat because he's like dying.
Right.
And yeah, and then Max comes in and sees what happens, and they have their final conversation, and then at the next train stop, Max gets off with Annie, and they leave Vincent alone on the train.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, they foreshadow Vincent's death in the very first conversation in the cab, where it's like he mentions how like he hates LA and how there was someone who died on the MTR, the train, and no one noticed for like several hours. Like how like he was upset by that, how meaningless that was, which is funny considering his life being like how he thinks everything is meaningless. And then at the very end of the movie, that's how he dies. He dies alone in the train, and the train moves off. Like, as far as anyone else can see, they can't tell he's dead, but he's dead, and he's like, his dead body's left alone on the train.
Love that. Did not notice that. Very much appreciate that, and do recollect it now that you bring it up. Yeah, that's man, that's dude. Those are the small little gems. It's just the writer adding that extra tidbit, for you to look back and say, "Oh my goodness, how could they tell us what was happening without directly telling us what was going to happen?" Oh, he did it right there. So good. One of those look back and see all the puzzle pieces were all there to begin with kind of things. Love that. Yeah, I mean, I did like the ending scene decently well. I will say this is probably the scene that I have the most gripes with, though. And the reason is that, frankly, as much as I love that he has the showdown and he does take responsibility and he fights Vincent, right?
Yeah.
Great in all aspects except for one. And the aspect is that Vincent is a trained expert marksman and Max is not. And the fact that Vincent gets lucky Max gets lucky when Vincent is trained to have two shots millimeters apart in a person's body, which is very hard to do with a pistol. If you've ever shot a gun, you should know that accuracy is very difficult, especially on a pistol. So, that it just, for me, it's like this guy was impressively good at shooting. And the fact that Max was just able to take him down, for me, was like, and he even says that to a certain degree in that final confrontation right before they start shooting. And he goes, "This is my job." That's what Vincent says. He's like, "This is literally what I do for a living." And then they start shooting, and of course, Vincent loses and ends up dying, right? That's the only thing that took me out of the movie where I went, oh, hold on, this really, if you look at the situation and everything they built up expectation-wise, this shouldn't be possible. Because Vincent, in his expert marksmanship, would have known to shoot through the window or something else that was reasonably able to accurately hit Max and take him out. But that doesn't happen. So, that's my only, like, real gripe with the movie, to be honest, is, like, I just don't think that climactic scene would have realistically happened based on all the precedent they gave us in the previous movie. But
I guess so. The only thing I'll say in defense of the scene is that they are on a moving train that's, like, rocking back and forth. So, like, there's a movement. Like, it's not stable ground, per se. So, it's going to be a little harder to get, like, a stable shot. But you're right, he is trained. So, I'm not saying it's, like, I don't completely disagree with you. And actually, I kind of agree with you a little bit on it. But, but, I mean, there's argument to be made that... And also, I don't think people are perfect. Just because you get a shot 9 times out of 10 doesn't mean you're going to get 100% or whatever. Like, 9 times out of 10. Like, there's a possibility you'll miss one time. So I'm willing to take the argument where it's like, Vincent will mess up once. Like, there's a possibility. And, of course, the one time he does mess up, it's the time where he dies. He gets mortally wounded.
Right.
But as you said, but I can see your point. That is a fair point to make. And as I said, and my review is 8 points. It's not 9. I agree the movie is perfect.
Right. And, I think, like, and so maybe this is me penny pinching in regards to giving them points where they might deserve it. But for me as an audience, my whole thought with that is, this would be a simple fix, right? In regards to, even if he has some sort of training that would justify giving him some level of closer competency, or at least justifying that in some way, I would feel like it was more believable. But everything about the story tells me that Max is the Joe Schmo on the street, who has never picked up a gun in his life, who's lived, running cabs for 12 years, and that's all he's familiar with. And he wants to be the best at that, which is great, but he doesn't have anywhere near the experience that Vincent does. Versus if he had something along the lines of, like, hey, I don't know, Vincent saying, hey, you ever picked up a gun before, or something like that, and Max going, well, my dad was a big gun fanatic, or something like that, anything to give some context to say he actually might be half decent with a gun, I think would make that scene perfectly, at least justifiable. Maybe not maybe you could still make the argument, but it'd not really have as many legs to stand on. So, and what I'm looking for here is plausible deniability, right? Basically, like, okay, you can at least make the argument. I just don't feel like there's a way to make the argument and really be convincing in this case.
Well, I mean, if they, the problem though is, like, if they had included scenes like that, it would have kind of undermined some of the themes and character with him, with who he was, just because he is kind of like, oh, like, everything has to be perfect. He's like risk averse kind of thing. Like, guns are kind of a risky thing to begin with. If he had experienced the guns, it would have slightly undermined a little bit of his character, just like him being risk averse, like not like waiting for things to be perfect, like how he's like trying to, like, I'm not saying it would undermine it, but it might undermine it a little bit.
Sure. Well, let me just make the compelling, well, maybe not so much compelling, but just like plausible deniability, basically. Okay, well, that could have actually played into his character more, where he goes, oh, well, yeah, I felt a lot of pressure from my father to do this, and I didn't actually feel like it was right, or I couldn't get it right, or something along those lines, where it didn't fit that perfect paradigm that he's trying to build for himself. And so he actually pushed it away, even though he was forced to train in it or whatever. Anyways, not trying to get too caught up in this, but I think it could actually be weaved in a compelling way. Like I said, I give it a 7.4. Amazing. Great
Yeah.
film. Would watch again. You know, even with what I think is a incohesive ending, this story is still a super solid movie that I would watch again on any
Yeah.
given day. So, you know, there's really something to be said about this film. As I've gushed about so many times, it is amazing. Definitely worth a watch. If you haven't watched it, definitely go back and check it out, because it's worth checking out. It really deserves its score. And yeah, that's all I have to say on that point. Didn't want to get too caught up in it. I just thought it was worthy of mention.
I mean, the only thing I could say, like, as far as negative for me, and I mentioned this at the beginning, is, like, once Fanning dies, like, the whole, like, FBI, like, police involvement in this whole, like, conflict, like, disappears. Now, it kind of makes sense, because we're seeing the story through Fanning's perspective, and when he dies, you kill him off. So it's almost like, okay, he's dead, like, you're not going to see what they're doing, per se. But it is kind of interesting to know, like, considering that there are helicopters, like with searchlights, like searching the city for Vincent, you don't even see those in the final chase for when he's going after Annie. So at that point they're not in a cab though, so I guess you could say maybe they just lost him somehow. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but yeah, I think you still make a decent point, because they hone in on him at the club, and the cab does drive away with him, with Max and Vincent. So it's not like they had no leads to go off of, and they were very, very close to catching him. So it would have been nice to at least see some sort of even, oh my goodness, we lost him type scenario from the head of the FBI or whoever it was that was chasing him once Ray disappears.
Yeah.
So yeah, because I did think that was interesting when you brought it up at the beginning. I hadn't really thought about that, but you're absolutely right. These are super trained agents who are used to a scenario where people are running away and tracking them down, right? So the fact that they just exit the picture once Ray disappears is at least questionable without providing some
context.
And I wouldn't say it's perfect, but at the same time they do provide scenes from the chief of police's perspective, or the chief of the FBI's perspective, whoever it is that's following Vincent and Max. So it's not that they have no reason to at least not provide that context. But yeah, definitely a fair critique, I would say.
So no, I mean the only, I can see why they may not have included it, and maybe it's because it would have just taken too much attention away from Max and Vincent in their final, like, conflict. Like, just to finalize the conflict between the two of them, it would have just been too much of a distraction to go focus on the FBI and what they were doing. Maybe not. I mean, they could have maybe integrated it. They could have just done one scene, say, hey, we lost him, kind of thing, like, and then show, because you do, I guess, because there's the one scene in the, like, you can see from the office building when Vincent is hunting Annie, you can see out the window, you can see the helicopters in the background still searching. So it's not like they're completely gone, but they clearly have no idea what Vincent is.
Right.
So I guess, yeah, if you just had a scene where you just like, we lost him, that probably would have solved that problem. Yeah.
Right. And I always try to look for, could we have a simple fix that provides, especially for something like this, that would have made it better? And we're really, as I said earlier, we're really starting to nitpick a little bit just to get it up to that, you know, for me, an 8, for Avalon, probably an 8.5, something like that, to really get it to that really nice level. You know, how could we make this almost perfect? We could have done this, could have done that. And we're talking about, you know, 30-second scenes, you know, 15-second scenes to make the point that we need to get it across and make it, at the very least, compelling or cohesive in a way that would have made me not be drawn out of the film, or him, like, not be drawn out of the film in whatever it was. But overall, still a very compelling story. Unless you have any disagreements or any things you would have changed based on your rating, based on this discussion.
Not really. I mean, the only other thing that I think it's worth noting, which I noticed when the last time around I was watching it, But it kind of plays into the whole philosophical side of the movie, where it's like, because we're having these discussions of life and death and meaning and like lives and how everything like how the world works, kind of. But you have like these yeah, because you have this weird scene where like, they stop in the middle of the road and you see like like a wolf and a fox, or, like two wolves cross the street, which is kind of odd. Like they focus on it, but it's almost like I feel like now that but I don't disagree with it because it's almost like it plays in the whole philosophical side of the story where it's like we're just like almost like hinting at maybe they're just animals or hunters in the midst of like looking for prey, or like I don't know, like it just like the way it's all framed, like I could kind of see what there was like hidden symbolism there or something. I don't know, but
did you see the coyotes show back up later in the film, or did they not?
Oh, I know why you're asking this, but no, they don't show up again.
See, I was waiting for that because I was expecting some sort of full circle there of the coyotes to have some symbolism really come to a close, really solid. Maybe that's in the extended version or in a scene they cut. I don't know. But yeah, I feel like there was supposed to be intent there with the coyotes. I personally, I appreciate you're trying to put meaning behind that because I want that. I personally won't be attributing motive there because I'm not sure what it was supposed to mean. I thought it was maybe something along the lines of, strangers in the night or something like that. But I honestly have no idea why they added a 2-minute scene of coyotes crossing the street and them staring at them.
I'll only say that scene does add, like, it's like right before the scene at the club, the whole shootout. So it's like this it kind of brings the tension and everything, but down to a really slow crawl before ramping it back up with the whole fight scene. So I mean, in a way, it does help the whole flow of the movie because it brings everything down to slow space before like thrashing it back up. So just creating creating greater contrast between what was and what is about to happen. So
yeah, that's very fair.
So
that is a good technique for sure. So yeah, okay. That's good. I appreciate that. Sure, we'll agree with that. What do you think about this film going forward, especially the story or the themes or any of that moving forward? What do you think that impact has, especially on culture and society and all of that? Is a story worth retelling?
I'd say so. I mean, I would show this movie to other people. I like this movie. I mean, it does make me kind of sad that I don't see more people talking about this movie, actually, because I do like it. And it's just like, I don't know. It's just like, because I feel like this is one of those stories that should be told. And I think maybe I have seen it, like, mentioned in, like, review. Like, I don't know, like, like those screenwriter books or something. Like, they mention great movies, and this is, like, one of those movies they mentioned, but, like, in passing kind of thing. I don't know. Like I feel like this movie deserves more attention than what it's getting, at least. And maybe that's just me. I just haven't heard very much about it until recently or something. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think that it's interesting because none of us have, or at least maybe some of the audience have, but most audience definitely have not experienced a situation where they've been held up by a hitman in a car, right? And so you haven't been faced with that existential threat of, what am I doing with my life? How do I move forward with my life? That type of thing. But a lot of us have some sort of experience where, we have a dream or a goal or something we want to go toward, and we don't fight for it like we should or make progress on it like we should. And so there's a certain sense in which this out of this world situation becomes very relatable to us as an audience because we have that same experience in regards to our own lives where we have goals, we have dreams, and we don't make progress toward them. And so sometimes it is a simple story like this that, it's crazy and all these things happen that are just absolutely bananas. But at the end of the day, it breaks down to, you're absolutely right. I should, start that podcast or open that shop or, create that comic or, write that story or whatever it is that you're wanting to do. it's in some ways this story about a hitman and a cab driver is along those lines, that you should take responsibility and take action toward that, right? It's enough with the research, enough with the dreaming, enough with the procrastinating. It's time to take action, and taking action means taking responsibility for what's going to happen, and you don't know what's going to happen. Max didn't. He didn't know if he was going to survive this encounter with the guy who was killing people in the back of his car, and he took action anyways. And all of us are called to take action in our lives, whatever that looks like. So it's very poignant for really every generation as they step forward, especially into adulthood, to reflect on and say, what am I going to do with my life going forward? Yeah. And that's why it's worthy of retelling. It's worthy of watching again today, 20 years later. And I think that's probably a solid place to end it, unless you have final notes.
No, not really anything else. The only thing I felt interesting, like trivia worth mentioning, is that the writer, Beatty, he conceived of the idea for this movie when taking a taxi cab home from Sydney Airport, apparently. So
nice.
It's like
it's the mundane things, dude. That's what inspires the writers. You have one little thing happen, your mind just goes bananas.
Or it's just like, what
if I was a hitman?
Yeah.
Proceeds to write, epic story. There you go. That's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We will be back, as we always are, next week. We will see each of you back then. As always, if you like this podcast, leave us a review, like and subscribe, all that stuff. We're done. All right. See you next week.